Death Claims, a Dave Brandstetter mystery. Book 2. Author, Joseph Hansen. Publisher, University of Wisconsin Press, Terrace Books. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 15. Waiting for the stoplight to turn green at Santa Monica and Western, he fell asleep. Only for a few seconds, but asleep. Those 2.5 hours last night, this morning, hadn't been enough. An angry blast of horns back of him woke him with a jerk. He stalled the engine and made mistakes trying to start it over. He didn't manage it before the orange light showed. He got across, but the cars he'd held up didn't. They bawled resentment after him. He muttered contrition and drove the leftover quarter-mile home, sitting extra straight. The Ferrari wasn't in the garage. Doug wasn't in the house, probably helping out at his mother's pet shop again. He walked, heavy-footed, through the sunset rooms, stripped, stepped into the shower wearily. He cranked the handles and stood under a hard, hot spray, arms out to prop him against the wall, head hanging between them, letting the heat soak in. It took away the muscle ache and the steam. He soaked his boniness, rinsed, then turned the spray cold and needling. It didn't wake him, it only chilled him, shivering, dripping. He pushed the white shuttered doors, thumbed the thermostat, then toweled himself, flapped into the blue robe, and went to the kitchen for a drink, to warm him again, to start him over, because he had to drive back to Los Calados, back to that beautiful, sad old house, to get an explanation from Dwight Ingalls. An explanation he knew wouldn't be any good. He liked Ingalls, felt sorry for him. He didn't want to go. Fingers clamped on the cold neck of an old Crow bottle. He stood glumly eyeing the red telephone against the wall by the swing doors. He could call Campos, unload the miserable job on him, but he knew he wasn't going to. Not first, only last. He tilted whiskey into a glass, splashed in a little water, drank deep. He shuddered, shut his eyes. He bowed his head and leaned on the counter till he felt the good heat start in his empty belly. He thought of John Oates, alone in the morning kitchen of April Stannard's shaky pink house on the white beach, belt tight around his scarred upper arm, sliding a needle into a swollen vein, letting loose the belt from his teeth, leaning like this, eyes shut, feeling the relief flood in. At whose expense? A nice man, April Stannard's voice echoed in Dave's head. A beautiful man, all the way through. Sure. Dave nodded, opened his eyes, straightened. Grimly, he swallowed another third of the drink. God forgive believers, because he, Dave, could not. That she rejected the ugly truths he told her didn't matter. It was what she'd made herself blind to in those months John Oates sheltered in her house, slept in her bed, ate her food, that Dave couldn't forgive. She had to have noticed something. It was such a small place. Peter must have noticed. It would explain his leaving. It would explain John Oates' refusal to tell the girl why, which had hurt her, but not beyond overlooking. Like how much else? Dave shook his head in disgust, finished off the drink, went back to the bedroom to dress. The chest sounded hollow. When he opened it, he frowned, pulled out the next drawer. Doug's empty. He crossed the room, bruising his hip on the big bed, and jerked open the closet. His clothes, none of Doug's. The carton with the pictures of Jean-Paul was gone, too. In the steamy bathroom, he saw now that Doug's razor was missing. His cologne, the living room, had turned shadowy. He lit a lamp, squinted, slid back a door of the record cabinet under the stereo components. His albums, Bach, Ligeti, but no Edith Piaf, no Jean Sablon. He stood pivoting in the aisle that led to the glass patio door. The white floor-to-ceiling bookshelf showed gaps. A sleek little white desk was in that aisle, too. He snapped on its lamp. Nothing. But under it, next to his gray-cased portable typewriter, was a midget wastebasket in bright swirls of orange, pink, like the couch cushions, and in its bottom lay torn scraps of paper, with Doug's writing on them. Many scraps. He'd failed a lot before giving up. Dave didn't reach for them. He stood and pushed the basket back with his foot. He was going to hear what they said. The Sawyer house was on the back of the lot, behind the shop under a pair of big, dark magnolia trees. It was frame, shingle-sided, low-roofed, and needed paint. The porch was a square of crack and sinking cement. It got used for storage. Heavy paper sacks of cat sand were piled under a sheet of green plastic tacked with clothespins. On the flat porch rail, two cages turned rusty, one with warped perches, the other with a squirrel wheel. Three cracked aquariums collected dust. A black and white spotted dog sat tongue hanging in a corner. Plastic. An ad for canned food. Dave pushed the bell button. Mrs. Sawyer favored flowered smocks. When she worked in the shop, it was only 6:15. Closing time, and she hadn't taken the smock off yet. Short, plump, she peered up at him through thick lenses. One thick lens, the other was carefully pasted over with a circle of white cloth. Years ago, a not-so-tame sparrowhawk had cost her an eye. The other eye was bright enough for two. The way she tilted her head was quick, bird-like. Her voice chirruped. "Uh-huh," she said. "I told him you'd be here." "He said not. He doesn't know you, does he?" Dave cocked an eyebrow. "How's that?" "You never give up. I found that out when you were looking for Fox Olson last fall. Seems to me Doug ought to have found it out about the same time." The black, shiny bird eye twinkled. Then she sobered. "You two had a fight, I guess." "Not that I know of," Dave said. "Oh, you know it," she laughed. "Doug throws things when he gets mad." "He didn't throw anything," Dave said. "PD like to see him?" "Of course." She stepped back, motioned him in a nursery rhyme hymn. "You can stay for dinner, too. Good cooking smells were in the air. It's what I always used to fix him when he sulked. Ham and scalloped potatoes. His favorite cheers him up." The furniture in the low-ceilinged living room was 1940s, overstuffed with flowered slipcovers. The window curtains, too, were flower prints. So was the wallpaper above the white enamel paneling on a square mantel over a shallow fireplace that housed a gas heater. An old wood-cased shelf clock ticked comfortably to itself. Underfoot was an oval braided carpet, sturdy, sun-faded, past a divider of low bookcases that prisoned china birds and animals behind leaded glass doors. The dining room had a round pedestal table with knobby paw, feet, and a fruit bowl. There was a plate rail. The plates on it were painted with game birds. She said, "He's in his room." Dave had been here for Christmas. He knew the floor plan at the rear of the house. He knuckled a door. No answer. He turned the knob, looked inside, dusky. But Doug was there, lying face to the wall on a narrow iron cot that was covered with a patchwork quilt in the dimness. He looked very slight, almost a child. Dave's foot struck an open suitcase on the floor. Dave made a sleepy sound, turned over, groped with a bandaged hand to switch on a lamp. It was an old gooseneck wrapped with friction tape that had gone gray with age. It leaned over a knotty pine table, scarred from use. A boy had put together model airplanes on that table, etching it with razor cuts. A school compass had scribed circles deep into it, vaguely the shapes of stencils from the 1930s. Homemade Christmas cards were outlined in splatters of red and green. Bells, fir trees, murky stains at one end memorialized a tray at sculpting in wet clay. Dave had heard the story. Doug had been 15 that summer. He'd wanted to make a male nude. He'd wrapped it in wet cloths when he couldn't work on it to keep the clay manageable, but also out of delicacy and fear that his parents would see it before they had. He'd scrapped it. After all, even if he'd been able to shape it right, a clay boy wasn't what he needed. He'd made a figure of a raccoon instead and given it to his mother for her birthday. For years, she kept it on view in the shop. Doug didn't know any more what had become of it. He said it had been pretty bad. Maybe, but he had talent. The watercolors that still hung on the walls showed that. He'd gone on to art school. The war had pointed him a different direction. He'd been in the Air Force. He said now, "What did you come for? You told me how it is, and that's how it is." "And you won't try to make it different?" Dave shut the door and leaned against it, hands in pockets. "I'm not worth the effort." You said that. Doug sat up, swung his feet to the floor. I didn't say it. You went to some pains to demonstrate it. You didn't leave a thing behind, nothing to excuse your coming back to pick it up. So we could talk. You mean so you could talk and I could listen? Doug pushed at his tousled shock of gray hair, squinting in the light. He picked up a cigarette pack from the scatter of loose change, keys, crumpled bills, comb, matchbook under the lamp. According to you, the fault's all on my side. He lit a cigarette. The ashtray he dropped the spent match into was makeshift. Doug hadn't smoked when he lived in this room. 25 years ago, it was a 7-ounce cat food can on the label. A torn-in hip boots winked and lifted a plumed cavalier hat. You're a little short on self-awareness, boy. People who are always exacting right behavior from other people tend to be that way. He blew smoke out of the circle of light, laid the cigarette in the cat food tin, bent for his loafers, slid them onto stocking feet, small feet. The mote in the other man's eye versus the beam in my own, Dave said. Right. You want to try to extract it? Doug stood up. No. He gave Dave a wan little smile and a quick head shake. Too painful. And I never could believe that I'm hurting you for your own good, crap. I can't believe it now. People who talk like that are lying. They may not realize it, but they like to hurt. He'd stacked cartons against the dresser. He lifted folded clothes out of one and knelt to lay them in the suitcase at Dave's feet. I don't like to hurt. Not anybody. Certainly not you. You're going back overseas, Dave said. Doug returned to the shadowy corner, shifted a carton, rummaged in another. There was a wavery oval mirror attached to the dresser. In it, Dave saw a nod. England. I'd have saved myself a lot of grief if I'd gone there in the first place. Straight from France. Never come back here. What the hell was there here? Something was wrong with his voice. He tried to say it over. What the hell was there here? There was me. Dave stepped over the suitcase, pushed aside an empty carton with his foot, gripped Doug's shoulders and turned him. He was crying. There still is me. I'm willing to fix whatever's wrong, but you'll have to tell me what it is. I know you don't want to. I know you want only to be kind. That's one of the better things about you. One of the reasons I don't want you to go to England. He gave the shoulders a gentle shake. Come on, Doug. It's your turn. I won't hold it against you. Yeah, okay. The voice was shaky, but the nod was firm. He went back to the table, to the cigarette, lifting its blue smoke up into the inverted white bowl of the lamp. He picked the cigarette up, drew deeply on it, turned to face Dave. You're pissed off because I keep a few pictures of him. Some music, some books. You keep a whole goddamn house that says Rod Fleming to you all day. He remodeled it, redecorated it, chose the furniture, rugs, color schemes, the faucets in the bathroom, even the friggin' pots and pans. He chose that Nelly bed. It's not me that's lived with you in that house since last November. It's not me that slept with you. It's him. No, you don't keep pictures of him, but Madge told me I look like him. He didn't want the cigarette. He twisted it out. And you come at me about John Paul. Jesus! Don't start throwing things, Dave said. Tell me what to do. List the house with Caldwell and Banker? Yes, get someplace for us. Not you and Rod's ghost. You and me. Doug shut his eyes. Oh, Christ. He dropped into the bed edge, bent forward, face in hands. I'm sorry. It's too much. It's a beautiful house. Forget it. You shouldn't have made me say it. Dave sat beside him, put an arm over his shoulders. Don't feel bad, he said. You're right. I ought to have shed it all when he died. Madge told me. The sign goes up tomorrow. Doug, I'll drop keys off at R. Fleming. They'll take back the furnishings. Doug sat straight, dragged a sleeve across his eyes. Thanks. And now for the ungrateful part. I'm not going back there, Dave. I'm not sleeping with you in that goddamn bed. Never again. Right. Dave smiled and kissed the salty mouth. We'll go someplace else. He thought it would probably be Madge's. She had room and she'd like having them, but he didn't care where it was so long as he could sleep. He'd never felt so tired in his life. A Gay Mysteries Audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.